Our image of Islam in Europe is always attached to our image of the guest worker. What we see here, a short film of those men, mostly men who came to Europe, especially in the Netherlands, this film, to work in fabrics. They did not have family, they did not have an institution. This is our image of Islam in Europe and Muslims in Europe in particular. But did you know that the history of Islam in Europe is longer than that? I will not go further to the Middle Ages and Spain and Andalusia, but I will get back 100 years ago. I will take you back 100 years ago, back in the time, in order to see how did Muslims exist in Europe? Did they ever exist? Was Europe in love with Islam in that colonial period? And my story will start there in Cairo. So I take you 100 years ago, almost, to Cairo, in the archive of one of the most important Islamic scholars. This is Sheikh Muhammad Rashid Rida. If you just remember him as, for our Dutch colleagues, Abraham Kuyper of Egypt. He is somebody with this religious image. He is the godfather of what we know now as Islamists. Take an example, the Muslim Brotherhood. In his archive, while doing my PhD, it's a family archive in Cairo, I came across 13 intriguing letters addressed to him from Cairo, from Berlin. The name of the sender of these letters was Dr. Zaki Heshmet Bey Kiram, Karlstrasse number 10 in Berlin. Studying these letters was very interesting for me and an eye-opener to see this connection between a Muslim scholar living in Cairo and another Muslim living in Karlstrasse number 10. To study the secondary sources, it did not show up that he is such an important figure, or at least this is how historians have imagined him. But looking again at the name, I was very, very intrigued by the name because it's such an exceptional name in Arabic, Kiram. It does not come that often in Arabic. So what to do as a historian at this moment? Very easy, check the telephone directory. And to my big surprise, I found in whole Germany 2 people living with this family name up till now. Choosing this name, calling, Kornwesterheim, a small village in the neighborhood of Stuttgart. Is this the family of Zaki Kiram who lived in Karlstrasse number 10? Yes, I am his son. How do you know? Do you have any materials about your father? Yes, come and see. His father, Zaki Kiram, was the commander of the troops, the Bedouin troops in Sinai during the First World War, fighting on the Ottoman and German side, an Arab officer in the German army. It's a long story, I'm not going to tell it, but it's just like just a small piece of the research we are doing within this ERC. Again, during my research, I have found another intriguing piece in an Egyptian newspaper from 1935. And the piece, what you see here, the title is Secretaire al-Jam'iyya al-Islamiyya al-Hollandiyya. I bet you understand Hollandia, so you understand everything. But this is a secretary of the Muslim Foundation in The Hague, the Dutch Muslim Foundation in The Hague. This gentleman in military uniform visited Egypt. He converted to Islam, and his name was Muhammad Ali van Beitem. So, again to Van Beitem, just in an Egyptian journal, if you still remember, he was the secretary of the Dutch Muslim Association in The Hague. Again, his name is very exceptional in Dutch, Muhammad Ali van Beitem. So what should you do is, again, the telephone directory. And it happens that he was also a Muslim convert to Islam, I have found, and then the family has this archive again. And I will tell you something. At this point, I thought of our ERC project. I said, there is something going on here. A Muslim convert in the Netherlands traveling to Egypt within the same circle of the Zaki Kiram. So there is something going on. There is a huge network going on in the interwar period which should be studied. And therefore, I have started to think about that. How did we imagine the status of those Muslims in Europe as part of European cultural history, not as part of the colonial history? So now our hypothesis in the project is to look at those Muslims as part of European history, not much as part of the colonial history. So our hypothesis is that we have to look at them inside here and not outside there. But how we do that? I'm going to now to show you some examples of the research we are doing. Looking at this picture, for example, this is a picture in The Hague, the Mubarak Mosque. The Mubarak Mosque was established in 1955. So this is the first institutional mosque in the Netherlands. But to my big surprise, if you remember from Betem, he was the one who started this project in 1929. So he started to ask for building a mosque in The Hague, and it took him more than 23 years in order for the people who followed him to establish this mosque after the Second World War. But why this idea of mosque? If you look back at the history of Europe, you would find that there were a few mosques in European big cities. This is, for example, what we see here is the Walking Mosque in London, which was used by Muslims as a mosque in 1914. This is a fascinating building, a wooden mosque in Wunsdorf in Berlin, which was used or established by the Germans. It does not exist anymore, unfortunately. It was established by the Germans for Muslim prisoners of war in Germany at this time. Another one, this is another Berlin mosque, which was established in 1924. And then this is a great mosque of Paris, which was established in 1926 as an honor to the North African soldiers who were killed during the First World War on the French side. But what did these Muslims do? What you see there is a picture of the first European Muslim Congress in Geneva in 1935. But if you know that, I have found this picture in the family archive of Charles van Betem, the Dutch Muslim, the Dutch convert to Islam, because he traveled there to meet other Muslims in Europe in order to lobby for the establishment of the mosque in The Hague. So here you see a picture of that too. So this picture combines and includes Muslim exiles, politicians, diplomats, religious men, women, so students. So it was just a combination of various ethnical and also intellectual backgrounds of Muslims living in Europe in the 20s and 30s of last century. This is an aspect. Another intriguing aspect, all of us know what the Hajj is. This is the Muslim annual meeting in Mecca to have the religious rituals. But Europe has become interested in Hajj because of its pan-Islamic influence on Muslims, because of the also cholera and hygiene developments, and also for specific economic reasons. What you will see here, for example, is a fragment of the first documentary we know ever about the Muslim Hajj from 1928. And this film, Het Grote Mekkafeest, was made by Jan Kruger, a Dutch Indonesian filmmaker who traveled to Mecca. He was not Muslim, he was undercover, and he took these fascinating moving pictures of Mecca in the 20s. But you might wonder, why would the Netherlands be interested in the Hajj? If you know that, the people who partly funded this film were the directors of some shipping companies in the Netherlands. So the film was made actually in order to be used as a kind of advertisement in order to convince Muslims to travel on Dutch ships but not other ships, so very typically Dutch. But what is interesting about the film, it was screened in the Leidse Gehoorzaal in Leiden. And if you look at the guests, the high officials and high guests, highly esteemed guests of the film, you would find the following names. Princess Juliana and her fellow students. She was studying in Leiden at this time. the Minister of Colony, and directors of shipping companies. It's not only that the Dutch ships brought Muslims to Mecca, there are also Dutch Muslims who went to Mecca. Not this, for sure. I'm not sure that this is related to Mecca, but I think it is. Some Dutch Muslims went to Mecca. I think the ladies here would just recognize this cosmetic brand, Dr. van der Hoog, but what I mean actually is this one. Dr. van der Hoog was a Muslim convert to Islam who traveled to Mecca, who wrote his travelogue. It's a fascinating record of a Dutch man on Hajj. So if you read it, you would find this fascinating cultural and cross-bordering activities of Muslims who traveled to Mecca and wrote about their religious and emotional and spiritual experiences in Arabia. Then again, I would say, was Europe in love with Islam? I think partly Europe was. Why I'm saying that? It's just like not because Islam was something beautiful and fascinating, but because Islam was also part of the European colonial history, and therefore Europeans tried to use some of these Islamic sites in Europe as propaganda centers, as diplomatic centers. And what we are doing in the project, this is only pieces of the project. We have other 3 colleagues who are working with me. Our PhDs, for example, here also sitting and then what they are doing, they are just studying the political activism of Muslims. How did this political activities evolve around Islamic ideas in Europe? The other candidate is just writing about mosques and religious institutions and identity, and the other third postdoctoral researcher is writing about the image of Europe among these Muslim communities. In order just to conclude, if we put all these activities of Muslims, intellectual, religious, and political, we can reach the conclusion that European Muslims and Islam in Europe in the interwar period was part and parcel of a larger global and transcultural history of human beings. Thank you so much.
Thank you.